When I close my eyes and travel back through the corridors of memory, I see two little girls running barefoot through the courtyard of our old house. The sun was warm, the air smelled of mango blossoms, and laughter echoed like music. Those two girls were me and my sister. She was younger by just 2 years, but in my heart, she was not just my sibling, she was my Mia, my confidant, my shadow that never left my side. We shared everything, as though our lives were stitched together by the same thread. When I was given a sweet, I would split it in two before even tasting it, because how could I enjoy it if she did not? At night, we slept on the same mat, whispering secrets under the mosquito net until our eyelids grew heavy. "Promise me we'll always be together," she used to say, her small hand wrapping around mine. "Always," I would whisper back, and I meant it with all my heart. Our mother often told us, sisters are like two wings of the same bird. If one breaks, the other cannot fly. I carried those words like scripture, believing they bound us together. When my sister cried, I was the first to wipe her tears. When she laughed, I laughed louder. She was the keeper of my dreams, and I was hers. As we grew older, life demanded more of us. I learned to help in the kitchen, while she often sat with her books, and I didn't mind. I wanted her to study, to chase her dreams, even if it meant I carried a heavier load. At family gatherings, relatives would comment, "You two are inseparable. One's heart beats, and the other feels it." I would smile proudly, thinking no bond in the world could rival ours. I still remember the monsoon evenings when the rain poured heavily and the roof leaked in little spots. We would sit together, collecting raindrops in steel cups, pretending they were magical potions. We talked about the future, how we'd live close to each other, how our children would play together, how, no matter where life took us, we would never let distance grow in our hearts. One evening, I fell sick with fever. I was shivering under a thin sheet, and though our mother told her to sleep, my sister stayed awake the whole night. She held my hand, wiping the sweat from my forehead with her tiny palm, whispering, "Don't leave me." Even in weakness, I smiled, because in that moment I felt I was the most loved person in the world. Such was our bond. It wasn't just love, it was trust, unquestioned and unshaken. I never doubted her intentions, never thought she could bring harm to me, because in my heart she was part of me. If I ever dreamed of happiness, she was always in that dream. If I feared sadness, it was only bearable knowing she would be beside me. As the years passed, responsibilities grew heavier, and life took us down different paths. But even then, whenever I earned a small coin, or saved a little from my daily struggles, I thought first of her. She should have this, I'd think. And when I gave, it never felt like sacrifice, it felt like joy. Because giving to her was like giving to myself. Sometimes, people warned me, "Don't trust too much, even siblings can change." I would laugh, almost offended. "You don't know my sister," I'd say with pride. "She would never hurt me. She's the one person who knows my soul." How little I knew then, how unaware I was of the ways life can twist the very bonds we think unbreakable. But in those innocent days, I lived in a world where betrayal was unimaginable, where my sister's smile was enough to assure me that I was safe, that I was loved, that I was never alone. And perhaps that's what makes betrayal cut the deepest, not the act itself, but the memory of the trust that came before it. As we grew older, life began to show its weight, though I carried it with quiet acceptance. I was the elder sister, after all, and in my heart, that meant it was my duty to protect, to sacrifice, to make sure my younger sister never lacked anything she needed. When my father's health began to weaken, and my mother's hands grew weary from endless household chores, it was I who naturally stepped in. I cooked, cleaned, managed errands, and learned to stretch every coin to keep the house steady. My sister, meanwhile, was encouraged to continue her schooling. "She has a sharp mind," my father would say proudly. "She could go far if we give her the chance." And so, I did not argue. I accepted my role as the silent caretaker, ensuring she had books, uniforms, and time to study. Many nights, I stayed awake stitching torn clothes under the dim light, just so she could wear them to school the next day. My hands grew rough, but my heart stayed soft because each sacrifice felt worth it if it meant her dreams could take flight. I still remember the day she came home after winning a school competition. She ran into my arms, waving her certificate with pride. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. My chest swelled with joy. I thought to myself, her victory is my victory. When the time came for her marriage, My parents worried about the dowry and expenses. Money was scarce, and the little we had seemed like a drop against an ocean. Without hesitation, I handed over my small savings. It was money I had put aside over the years, coins and notes gathered from little sewing jobs and odd tasks. I had dreamed of maybe buying a small gold chain for myself one day, but in that moment, the choice was easy. I placed it in my mother's hand and said, "This is for her. She deserves the best." At the wedding, as my sister sat dressed as a bride, she looked radiant, like a queen. My heart was full, even as I stood in the shadows, unnoticed. My own sorry faded compared to the silks around me. I didn't mind. Seeing her happy was enough. When she left with her new husband, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'll never forget what you've done for me." Tears rolled down my cheeks, but they were not of sadness, they were of pride. Time went on, and though her new life grew comfortable, mine remained modest. Still, whenever she visited, I shared whatever little I had. If I had cooked a simple meal, I would set aside the best portion for her. If I bought a new blanket in winter, I would say, "Take this, you need it more." Even when I had so little, I felt rich in love, because giving to her was a joy I could not measure. Sometimes, neighbors would tease me. "You give too much," they'd say. "Keep something for yourself. One day, you might need it." I only smiled. "What I give my sister is not lost. It's love returned," I'd reply. In my heart, I believed that love always came back, even if not in the same form. But life is not always so kind. As the years passed, I began to feel the cracks of weariness. My health wavered, my strength sometimes faltered, and my small savings vanished into daily struggles. Yet, even in my weakness, I believed one thing with certainty: if ever I stumbled, if ever I needed someone to lean on, my sister would be there. Hadn't I been her shadow in her struggles? Hadn't I carried her dreams on my shoulders? She was not just my sister, she was my other half. I trusted her with my secrets, my fears, and my little possessions. I believed with all my heart that she would guard them as her own. I had no doubt, no suspicion, for, in my eyes, she was still the little girl who once held my hand on stormy nights and whispered, "Always." And perhaps that blind trust, that unshakable faith, was the very thread she would one day use to unravel me. But at that time, I was unaware. All I knew was love, sacrifice, and devotion. I had poured myself into her life so fully that I could not imagine a world where she would not do the same for me. How naive I was. How unprepared I was for the day when love would turn into betrayal, when trust would be broken by the very hands I once held so tightly. Life has a way of testing the very bonds we think are unbreakable. For years, I carried my burdens silently, never asking for much, never demanding help. But time, with its steady hand, began to weigh heavy upon me. My health, once strong enough to endure endless chores, began to falter. I woke one morning with a cough that lingered for weeks. At first, I ignored it, brushing it off as a passing ailment. But soon, my body felt weaker, my steps slower, and even the simplest tasks exhausted me. My savings, already small, began to drain with doctor visits and medicines. I still tried to stitch clothes for neighbors, but my hands trembled at the needle. Nights became longer, filled with thoughts I had never allowed before: fear, uncertainty, and loneliness. On those dark hours, one thought gave me comfort: my sister will be there for me. After all, hadn't I stood by her in every storm? Hadn't I emptied my hands to fill hers? I told myself that if there was one person I could rely on, it was her. So, with hesitant hope, I sent word to her. When she came to visit, I smiled through my pain, embarrassed to show how much I was struggling. But she saw it: the thinness of my body, the fatigue in my eyes, the medicines on my bedside. I waited for her to take my hand, to say, "Don't worry, I'm here now." Instead, she shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting away. She spoke of her busy household, her children's needs, her husband's expenses. "Times are tough for everyone," she sighed. "I'll see what I can do." Her words stung, but I pushed the pain aside. I told myself she was worried, maybe overwhelmed. I still believed she would not let me down. Days turned into weeks, but no help came. The medicines grew costly, and my strength continued to fade. Desperate, I swallowed my pride and went to her home. She welcomed me politely, but there was a distance in her tone, as though I were a guest, not her sister. I explained my struggles, my need for a little support, anything to ease the burden. Her response was like a blade through my heart. "I wish I could help," she said flatly, but we have our own priorities. You've managed so far, you'll manage again. I stared at her, unable to believe the words had come from her lips. This was the sister I had carried in my arms when she was small, the sister I had given my savings for, the sister I had trusted with my soul, and now, when I needed her most, she turned away. That night, I lay awake, not from sickness, but from heartbreak. My body ached less than my spirit. I thought of every sacrifice, every shared secret, every moment of love, how quickly they seemed to vanish, replaced by coldness and excuses. Neighbors noticed my struggle and asked gently, "Doesn't your sister help you?" I forced a smile, ashamed to admit the truth. How could I tell them that the person I trusted most had abandoned me? But the worst was yet to come. In my weakness, I had confided in her about the little wealth I still held, a small piece of land left by our parents, and a few ornaments I had kept tucked away. I thought, foolishly, that if anything happened to me, she would safeguard them. After all, she was my blood, my sister. What I did not know was that while I battled illness, she was quietly securing her own gain. She convinced me to sign a paper, assuring me it was just to manage things on my behalf. Trusting her as I always had, I signed without question. Only later did I learn that I had signed away my rights to the land. The shock nearly broke me. Not only had she refused to help me in my hour of need, she had taken what little security I had left. I felt crushed, powerless, as though the very ground had been pulled from beneath me. Betrayal by a stranger wounds, but betrayal by your own blood leaves a scar that never fades. And yet, in that moment of despair, I did not hate her. My heart, though shattered, still longed to believe there was some explanation, some reason behind her actions, but deep inside, I knew the sister I had trusted with my life had chosen herself over me. Betrayal is a peculiar kind of pain. It doesn't strike like lightning, all at once. It seeps in slowly, like poison, spreading through your veins until it consumes your heart. When I first realized what my sister had done, I was in disbelief. My hands trembled as I held the papers that bore my signature, the very papers that declared the small piece of land, my only anchor in this world, no longer mine. It was hers now, all legally documented. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, my mind refusing to accept it. No, this cannot be. She wouldn't do this to me. Not my sister. I replayed her words in my head, how she had smiled reassuringly when she asked me to sign, saying it was only to manage things. I had trusted her completely, not even reading the fine print. Why would I? She was my blood, my sister, my second heartbeat. The realization that she had used my trust against me was like a dagger twisting inside me. I staggered to her house, my voice quivering as I confronted her. "Tell me it's not true," I pleaded. "Tell me you didn't take the land." But instead of shame, her eyes were cold. "I did what was necessary," she replied. "You can't manage it anyway. It's better in my name." Her words cut deeper than the betrayal itself. It wasn't just the land, it was the way she dismissed my pain, as if my existence no longer mattered, as if all my sacrifices, all my love, had been erased by ink on paper. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to ask how she could forget the nights I had stayed awake for her, the coins I had saved, the meals I had given up so she could eat more, but the words caught in my throat. I stood there, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. Neighbors soon came to know. Whispers filled the village. Her own sister cheated her, took everything. Some pitied me, others shook their heads as though I had been foolish. Shame cloaked me like a heavy shawl. I avoided the market, avoided gatherings. Each time I heard laughter, I imagined it was at my expense. My nights became haunted by memories. I saw us as little girls again, holding hands in the rain, swearing to always be together. I heard her childhood promises. "I'll never forget what you've done for me." Now, those words rang hollow, like echoes in an empty room. But betrayal wasn't only about what was taken from it was about what it did to my heart. I found myself doubting everything. If she could betray me, then what did love even mean? What did family mean? The very foundation of my life felt shattered. One evening, when the pain became unbearable, I sat outside under the stars and whispered, "Why, God, why would she do this to me?" I gave her everything. Tears blurred my vision, but the sky remained silent. All I felt was the emptiness beside me where my sister's presence once lived. Yet even in that brokenness, part of me still longed for her. I wished she would come, explain, apologize, hold my hand and say, "I made a mistake," but she never did. Days turned into months, and her visits stopped. The bond we had once called unbreakable was severed, not by distance, but by choice. Her choice. It was in those days that I realized the cruel truth. Sometimes, the deepest wounds are not made by enemies, but by those we love the most. A stranger can rob you of money, but only family can rob you of trust. Still, as I lay on my bed, weakened by illness and betrayal, I whispered to myself, this will not be my end. For, though my sister had taken my land, my trust, and nearly my spirit, she had not taken the one thing she could never touch, my will to rise again. After the land was gone, and the truth of my sister's betrayal could no longer be denied, I felt as though I had been stripped of everything, my security, my dignity, my faith in love itself. The house that once held warmth now felt like a cage of memories. Every corner reminded me of her, our whispered secrets, our laughter, our promises. But now, those memories mocked me. They whispered, you trusted too much. You were blind. I stopped going out. I stopped speaking much. Food lost its taste, and days blurred into one another. Some mornings, I would wake up and, for a brief moment, forget the betrayal, but then it would return like a storm, crashing into me, leaving me breathless. I felt foolish. How could I have been so naive? Neighbors' words echoed in my head. Even siblings can change. Don't trust too much. I had laughed at them once. Now, their warnings were wounds, reopening every day. Loneliness became my constant companion. My illness lingered, my savings were gone, and I had no one to lean on. Nights stretched endlessly, filled with tears that refused to dry. I whispered into the silence, why wasn't my love enough? Why wasn't my sacrifice remembered? But the silence offered no answers. There were days when despair nearly swallowed me whole. I would sit at the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, wondering if my life had lost its meaning. If even my sister, my other half, had abandoned me, then what was left? What was I worth? Yet, in that darkness, a small voice inside me refused to be silenced. It said, you have survived worse storms. You have endured pain before. You are more than what was taken from you. At first, I ignored it, but slowly, the voice grew louder. It reminded me of my mother's words. Sisters are wings of the same bird. One of my wings was broken, yes, but perhaps the other could still carry me forward. I began to search not for answers from my sister, because I knew they would never come, but for strength within myself. I forced myself to step outside again, to feel the sun on my face, to breathe in the scent of earth after rain. Small things, but they reminded me I was still alive. A kind neighbor noticed my frailty and brought me some food. You've helped so many before, she said softly. Let us help you now. Her kindness was like water to a parched throat. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe I wasn't as alone as I believed. I started sewing again, though my hands were weak. At first, I stitched slowly, clumsily, but with each day, my rhythm returned. Each thread I pulled through fabric felt like a thread stitching my soul back together. I told myself, if my sister took what was in my hands, she cannot take what is in my heart. The journey was slow, painful, and filled with moments of relapse. Some days I still cried until my pillow was soaked. Some days I still longed for her presence, for her voice. But little by little, I realized that waiting for her to heal me was only deepening my wounds. Healing had to come from within. So I began to pray not for her to change, but from my heart to find peace. I prayed for strength, for resilience, for the courage to rise from ashes. And as I prayed, I felt a quiet power stirring inside me, reminding me that betrayal may wound, but it does not define. It was in that space between despair and hope that I discovered something vital. Losing my sister's trust did not mean I had lost myself, and that discovery became the first step toward my healing. The day I realized that healing would never come from my sister's apology, but from my own acceptance, was the day my life began to change. At first, the thought of forgiveness felt impossible. How could I forgive someone who had torn my world apart, who had looked me in the eyes and chosen greed over love? Forgiveness, I thought, would mean weakness. It would mean letting her win. But as weeks turned into months, I carried a heaviness inside me. Bitterness grew like poison, seeping into every corner of my heart. I realized that clinging to anger wasn't hurting her, it was only destroying me. So one morning, as the sun rose through my small window, I whispered words that felt foreign on my lips. I forgive you. My chest ached as I said it. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I wasn't excusing her betrayal. I wasn't erasing the wound. I was simply releasing myself from the chains of anger. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. It was as though a door had opened, letting in light I hadn't seen in years. With forgiveness, I began to rebuild. I decided to focus on what I still had, rather than what I had lost. My hands, though aged and weary, still had skill. I took up sewing more seriously, making quilts and clothes for children in the village. Word spread, and soon, neighbors began bringing me fabric, asking for small pieces to be made. It wasn't much, but it gave me purpose again. Each stitch carried a silent prayer, each pattern a symbol of resilience. People often told me, "Your work has warmth, like it carries a piece of your heart." And in truth, it did. My heart, though scarred, was still beating with love. I began teaching young girls how to sew, sharing with them not just the craft, but the lessons of life I had learned through pain. I told them, "Don't measure your worth by what others give or take from you. Your worth lies in how you rise after you've fallen." The more I spoke these words to them, the more I believed them myself. Still, there were nights when loneliness would creep in. I would think of my sister where she was, whether she thought of me at all. Sometimes, the memory of her laughter would return, bittersweet and sharp. But instead of drowning in grief, I would place my hand on my chest and remind myself, she may have taken things from my life, but she cannot take the love I still hold in my heart for the world. Through prayer, work, and community, I transformed my pain into strength. People began to look at me not as the woman who had been betrayed, but as the woman who had survived and blossomed despite betrayal. One afternoon, a young woman I had taught sewing said to me, "Grandma, you are like a tree. Even though the storm broke some branches, you still give shade, you still give fruit. That is why we admire you." Her words filled me with tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude. For so long, I had felt broken, diminished, but to her, and perhaps to others, I had become a symbol of endurance. And I realized then that betrayal had not destroyed me. It had shaped me. It had forced me to dig deeper into myself, to find courage I never knew I had. As time passed, I no longer longed for my sister's apology. Whether she felt guilt or not was no longer my burden. My healing had come not from her words, but from my own decision to live with dignity and compassion. I learned that setting boundaries was also a form of love for myself. Never again would I allow blind trust to lead me into pain. I would give freely, but wisely. I would love openly, but with strength. And through it all, I chose compassion, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Betrayal may have cut me deeply, but it did not define me. What defined me was how I chose to rise afterward, with resilience, with grace, and with love still intact. And in that rising, I found freedom. Years had passed since the betrayal. My life had found a quiet rhythm, days filled with sewing, teaching, prayer, and simple joys. I no longer waited by the door for someone who never came. My heart, though scarred, was steady. And then one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, there was a knock at my door. My heart skipped. Visitors usually came in the neighbors' children, women bringing cloth. Who could it be at this hour? When I opened the door, my breath caught. There she was, my sister. Her hair was streaked with gray now, her shoulders stooped, her face carrying lines that spoke of burdens she had borne. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The years of silence, of betrayal, of longing and bitterness, hung heavy between us. Finally, she whispered, "Sister, may I come in?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door, to protect the fragile peace I had built. But another part of me, the part that still remembered her laughter and her tears, could not. I stepped aside. We sat in silence for a while. She looked around my modest home, at the quilts on the walls, at the little sewing table cluttered with fabric. "You've made a life," she said softly. I nodded, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Yes, a life that wasn't easy to build. Tears filled her eyes. "I know," she whispered, "and I am sorry." The words I had once longed to hear now felt almost too late. Still, my heart trembled at them. I asked quietly, "Why now?" She lowered her gaze. "Because time is short. I have carried guilt all these years. I thought money and land would fill my emptiness, but it didn't. The house feels cold, even with riches. I miss you." Her words struck something deep within me. Part of me wanted to cry, to say, "You should have thought of that before." But another part of me saw her, as she was not the betrayer, but my sister, an old woman broken by her own choices. I sighed. "You hurt me more than anyone else ever could. You took not only what was mine, but what was ours, our bond, our trust. Do you understand that?" She nodded. tears streaming down her face. I do, and I cannot undo it. But if you will allow it, I want to spend what time we have left as sisters again. Her plea pierced me. I thought of all the nights I had cried, all the days I had doubted my worth. I thought of the strength I had built, the peace I had earned. Did I dare risk reopening the wound? For a long moment, I said nothing. I looked at her truly. I saw not just the sister who betrayed me, but also the little girl I once held hands with as we walked to school. The woman I once whispered secrets to under the stars. Finally, I spoke. I cannot forget, but I have already forgiven, not for you, but for myself. If you want a place in my life again, it must be on new terms. No lies, no greed, only truth. She nodded eagerly, like a child. I can promise that. I have nothing left to hide. We sat there, two old women, scarred by life and by each other. And though the road ahead would not be easy, I felt something stir in my heart, a cautious hope. Perhaps reconciliation was not about erasing the past, but about choosing, despite it, to walk forward together. That night, as she left my home with a promise to return the next day, I whispered a prayer, not for the past to change, but for the future to hold peace. And in that moment, I knew, betrayal had once broken me, but forgiveness and now, maybe even reconciliation, had set me free. The days that followed my sister's return were unlike anything I had known. After years of silence, we were suddenly sharing moments again, awkward at first, fragile, but moments nonetheless. She would visit in the mornings, sometimes bringing bread or fruit, sometimes just her company. At first, I kept my guard high. Every word, every gesture, I measured carefully, afraid of being deceived again. But as time passed, I noticed something in her exhaustion, not just of body, but of spirit. She was not the proud, grasping woman I remembered. Life had carved humility into her. One afternoon, as we sat together sewing, she said, "I thought wealth would protect me, but the more I gained, the more I lost. Friends left when the money ran out. Children fought over things I thought would bring them joy. And in the end, I was alone. That's why I came back. I wanted not land or riches, but you." Her words softened something in me. I realized then that while betrayal had left me broken, it had also left her empty. We were both victims not of each other, but of choices made in weakness. Still, I knew I had to protect the life I had built. So I set boundaries. I told her, "You are welcome in my home, but I will not depend on you, nor will I allow you to take from me again. If we are to be sisters, it must be with honesty and respect." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "That is all I ask." With time, our conversations grew easier. We laughed again, though not as freely as before. We cooked together, recalling our mother's recipes, and shared stories of childhood. But always, there was an unspoken awareness that we were building something new, not restoring what once was. And strangely, I found that I no longer wanted the past. The past was gone, and clinging to it only hurt. What mattered now was the choice I made each day, to let love guide me, but never at the expense of my dignity. One evening, as we sat watching the sun sink behind the hills, she whispered, "I don't deserve this second chance." I looked at her and said gently, "None of us deserve love. It is a gift. What matters is what we do with it when it is given." In that moment, I saw peace in her eyes. Perhaps for the first time in years, she believed in redemption. As for me, I discovered a deeper truth. Betrayal had taught me strength. Forgiveness had given me freedom, but choosing to let her back into my life had given me wisdom. I had learned that love does not mean blind trust, nor does forgiveness mean forgetting. It means standing tall, with open hands and guarded heart, offering kindness while honoring oneself. In the village, people began to notice our reunion. Some whispered, "She's a fool for taking her sister back." Others said, "She is stronger than both of them, for she turned pain into peace." I did not care for either judgment. What mattered was that I was at peace with myself. And so, I lived my days with courage, teaching, sewing, praying, and now sharing quiet evenings with my sister. The wound remained, but it was no longer raw. It had healed into a scar, reminder not of pain, but of survival. If there is one lesson my story holds, it is this: even the deepest betrayal cannot destroy the soul that chooses to rise. We are not defined by what others do to us, but by how we respond, by the love we refuse to let die inside us. My sister and I would never be the same as before, but we were something new to old women, bound by blood and scarred by choices, yet still walking side by side into the twilight of life, and that, I realized, was enough.